This story is about a schoolboy who was bullied by everyone for his weak skills and mediocrity in school. He often did not get enough sleep and slept in class, as he liked to play video games until late. His eyes opened and sparkled with joy. Emotions were overflowing. He had not experienced such happiness for a very long time and thought that this was real. Standing in front of the class with their hands raised in joy, everyone was surprised by such an act. Kazuro, that's the name of our main character, thought that he had defeated a terrible monster and saved the world from destruction. Everyone praised him, rejoiced, and thanked him. He was pleased and glad that he had finally become a hero. Opening his eyes, he found himself in front of the class, not understanding what was happening. Everyone laughs at him. Kazuro's smile disappears from his face, turning into the horror of realizing that it was a dream. How ashamed and awkward he felt because he achieved everything he wanted all his life. The world in which our hero lived was filled with monsters, and becoming a hero who would free humanity was his cherished dream. A long time ago, a war broke out on the planet with the monsters that came to our world. They callously killed people and destroyed cities one after another. The idea that this was the end of humanity was real, but the monsters that came to our world were extremely dangerous. But they had one vulnerability. A person could absorb them, making them his weapon. This is how absorbers appeared in the world. Unfortunately, not everyone had this power. Absorbers were in great demand, and their power was our salvation from monsters. But the power of the absorber depended only on the monster it absorbed and the number. They were divided into 3 types. Those who could absorb the power of one monster, the so-called B rank. There were the most of them. A rank, those who can absorb 2 monster powers, and S rank, 3 or more monsters. Kazuro was an ordinary low-ranking guy. The thoughts in his head overwhelmed him, standing in front of the class in confusion. The dream was so real it's hard to believe that it's not real. After this, I sat down and wanted to play my favorite game, where you have to kill ghosts. Trying not to pay attention to the jokes and grins of his classmates, he again plunged into the game world. The teacher started yelling at Kajuro for behaving like this. Not only did he sleep in class, but he also sat on his phone, and his academic performance was poor. Today is the exam, after which it will be clear who will become the absorber. Our hero completely forgot that the exam is divided into theoretical and practical parts today. On the theoretical side, everything was terrible, but on the practical side, this is what will determine the fate of our hero. Chance to become a scavenger. Otherwise, you will work tirelessly at a construction site until the end of your days. This gave Kazuro strength and confidence, realizing that hard work on a construction site, pulling bears and operating construction equipment is not his thing. The teacher raises our hero to refresh his knowledge and tell him how to properly absorb monsters and use their power. Kazuro begins to get up from his desk slowly. Kazuro is a witty guy. Knowing how to absorb the powers of a monster, it is enough to find a way to irritate the monster so that it mindlessly attacks, revealing its vulnerabilities, or to attack unnoticed. But this is difficult and rarely feasible. Most monsters can smell a person a mile away. The class bursts out laughing. The answer is not entirely correct. If you act this way, then the risk of death is quite high. You need to act as a group, attack at the same time, and victory will most often go to the absorbers. The guys laugh at the guy, knowing how weak he is and how he cannot cope with the monsters alone. His deskmate and best friend Poe also laughs and tells other classmates that the boy clearly doesn't understand anything. The teacher is angry for stupid answers. Monsters have many powers and even control the elements of nature. These are extremely dangerous creatures. You have to be careful. Kajuro didn't care much about the teacher's words. He wanted to quickly start working as an absorber and show everyone what he was really capable of. Answering the teacher's questions, he asks permission to charge the phone, thereby undermining the silence in the class and striking insolence. Kajuro behaves this way because he was always bored at school, and there were no useful subjects for him there. The girls in the class laugh at our hero, thinking that he is stupid. Kazuro has long been accustomed to this reaction. He just likes the smiles of beautiful girls, but there has never been a girl. The desire to meet a beautiful girl who understands him and supports him so that he can push her against the wall and express all his feelings, or at least a beautiful monster. True, your actions can only scare the girl, and the chance will be missed. The thoughts of this slightly anxious teenager made him blush, and did not please the teacher very much. Kazuro always liked to look at beautiful girls, but this was not always the case. He was modest in terms of communicating with girls, and therefore most often heard refusal. From such thoughts, loudly, the class laughed with all their hearts. Only the teacher was ashamed. Anger grew and could barely be restrained. She was already shaking from Kazuro's impudence. But she understood that the boy was only provoking and wanted to leave the lesson. A hit on the table silenced everyone, and the breath caught in their lungs. Her gentle hand in moments of anger turned into a rather dangerous weapon, and getting hit on the head with such a hand would be painful. The teacher's eyes filled with anger. Emotions took precedence over reason. Kazuro knew that punishment would inevitably overtake him. He had not seen such a teacher for a long time. The previous time he was also to blame for the stink bomb in the office. The teacher sends Kazuro to the wall, hoping that he will come to his senses someday. The boy still manages to laugh it off and is just glad that he was given the opportunity to be alone in the corner. The teacher was very upset by this behavior that her head began to hurt. The teacher begins to tell the children how the exam will be assessed and the options where to take it. A grade can be obtained for completing the room corresponding to the letter B in room B, C in room C, and D in room D. The children sat at their desks and listened carefully to the teacher. They wanted to pass the exam with flying colors and ensure a good life for themselves. Kazuro also needs to listen to the material, so the teacher allows him to sit down. Since our hero is lazy and weak, the teacher advises him to choose the weakest room. D. Kazuro, listening to the teacher's advice, walked to his desk and rubbed the back of his head with his hand, pretending that he agreed and he will do it. Children turn on their holographic computers to select the room where they will take the exam. Difficult choices that will shape their future. Each student carefully reads the description of each room with monsters to determine where to go and what they can pull with their strength. A classmate at his desk suggests going to room D together, to which Kazuro responds with a categorical no. He decided long ago to go through room A to prove to himself and others that he is strong. Po laughs and advises him to stop joking and do as the teacher said. Without thinking for long, Kazuro presses a button on the screen to start the exam in room A. This choice will entail many tests and show future development towards working in the Absorber Bureau. A teleporter begins to activate on the screen to transport Kazuro to the testing area. Advanced technology with magic makes this possible. Kazuro begins to feel how his body is gradually being sucked into the monitor screen. The neighbor at the desk is shocked by what is happening, since a weak absorber cannot survive in Zone A. He starts shouting to the teacher to pull him out and not let him in. Po was very scared for his friend and thought that he would not return alive. The teacher starts shouting for Kazuro to stop, otherwise he might die. This is too dangerous for a student of his level. All the children are surprised at how crazy the act is, but he decided a long time ago and was not going to give up. Everyone in the class looks on in surprise as Kazuro is pulled into the teleport of Zone A, a room where monsters live much more dangerous than in the video game. The rest of the children could not even think of going to this zone, because they understood that they were too weak. The teacher, seeing how Kazuro was pulled into Zone A, got scared and realized that the exam would not be possible without sacrifices. Our hero and other schoolchildren find themselves in an old, abandoned place infested with monsters. Determination is visible in the eyes. They stood and waited to be brought up to date and told where to go. There was a dark forest and a dark sky all around. Kazuro still had the same company, the school's favorite and main star, Tsuyuki, with her minions and 2 classmates. They looked at our hero with great contempt. These were students from another class, and they knew each other. The bespectacled boy always offended Kazuro with the fact that he was a weakling and could not even summon a monster. He stood behind Tsuyuki and adjusted the frame of his glasses on his face. Suddenly a strange ghost appears above his classmates, his red eyes and pale skin. For the first time they saw a ghost in person. The girl felt something appear behind her and began to tremble with fear, and her lips curled and trembled. The guys were scared and alarmed by the appearance of the monster at the start of the exam. The girl immediately climbed into the arms of her classmate, who always loved her. The boy did not immediately understand what had happened, as the girl pressed hard and almost knocked him down. Kojuro did not show fear. He saw a harmless ghost in front of him, although the others were scared, but he looked with suspicion. He was ready to begin the exam and show what he was capable of. This ghost turned out to be an examiner and will take an exam, according to the rules of which Nada will hold out for a day in an old, abandoned hospital and absorb the powers of at least one monster. The ghost looked like an ancient monk who helped people. Crows flew around and created an eerie atmosphere. Having learned that they had to stay in a hospital full of monsters for 24 hours, the children got scared and thought that they would definitely not survive. In order to be protected at night, they had to capture the monster's forces before midnight in order to get into the safe zone. The examiner assured the children that if they were in danger and they could not cope with it, everyone is given a scroll that will take them back to class. If they can kill the goblins and take their bead, they will receive a reward. Scrolls provided the ability to transfer, but not protection. If it was lost or damaged, you would not be able to get out of here. The exam starts now, 2 hours left until midnight. Our group stood in front of the huge arch of the hospital with monsters in fear and anticipation of something that will change their lives. A long and tall staircase led to the main entrance, and the decorative arches and decorations on the pillars were quite old. Even in front of such a terrible place, they looked at Kojuro and did not understand why he came here. He had no chance. Everyone was sure of his imminent death and told him to get out. The bespectacled boy stood behind, and this place was quite creepy that he was a little scared. Kojuro stood in front of the entrance and decided to go first in order to find a monster for himself as quickly as possible and test his skills. The guys behind saw that the boy went first. They decided not to split up yet and to follow him. The crows only frightened the children with their cries and forced them to follow inside. Upon entering the hospital, there were pools of blood everywhere, a disgusting smell and frightening sounds. Looking at all this, there were fewer and fewer good thoughts, so they stayed together. Kojuro and the rest of the students walked down the hospital corridor. There is blood all around. Fear creeps into the hearts even more, but Kojuro cannot be overcome by this. Being at the front, our hero wanted to play a trick on his classmates by coming up with an insidious plan to scare them. Looking around the corridors of the hospital and seeing several paintings on the wall with portraits of the chief physician and director. The idea of making a joke may not have been appropriate, but it would have diluted the already tense situation. Pretending that there was a crowd of monsters in front of him, he signaled to the others to stop. Kojuro began to slowly move back, showing with all his appearance that he was scared. His steps were very careful and slow. He asked everyone not to make noise. He said that there was a huge fanged monster with a large mouth and a long tail devouring a man, and around there was a crowd of small orcs grinning their teeth. Suyuki and his comrades got a little scared and began to show that they were scared. Kojuro began to scream in fear and run as fast as he could, setting an example for the others in order to scare them more. His scream was loud and could wake up the monsters, so the guys had no choice but to run away from here and back to the exit. The children rushed to run along the blood-stained corridor towards the exit, trying not to turn around. The fear in their eyes gave them the strength to run faster and hope for survival. While on the street, the students fell exhausted to the ground, knowing that the monsters did not leave the exam area. They could relax. They tried to catch their breath and calm down. Suddenly, after they came to their senses, they noticed that Kojuro is not with them. The thought was that he did not have time and was grabbed before leaving. But suddenly loud laughter is heard from the balcony of the hospital. The guys raise their heads to see who is laughing so hard and see him. It was Kojuro, standing and applauding his cowardly classmates. For the first time, he mocked them. "We bought it," he said. He clapped his hands and said that now it's clear who the bespectacled coward is. The guys were terribly unhappy with this action and began shouting at him in an irritated voice. They were ashamed that some weakling humiliated them, especially the main beauty of the school. The bespectacled man, without finding words, told Kazuro everything he was thinking and said what he would get for it. Beauty was upset at how she was set up and made to feel afraid, because she is the strongest of them. Her skill level was much greater than the others. The henchmen began to tell Kazuro what a brute and scum he was. Kazuro looked at their frightened faces. He was relaxed and felt no fear. Confidence in his abilities was high, but the statements of his classmates slightly shamed him. The beauty, proudly raising her head, said that she was not afraid, but simply followed the others, that in case of danger she would save them. To which the henchmen were touched by her words, and were sure that she would have saved them. She was from an influential family and meant a lot to them. Kajuro, listening to all this nonsense, simply turned around and left in search of monsters to absorb and defeat them. And while they are on the street, he has a better chance of finding someone first. Tsuyuki and the guys were very unhappy that they were being ignored and were not going to leave it like that. Going down to the first floor, he began to explore the offices in search of monsters and came across an ophthalmologist's office from where strange sounds were coming. "Here it is!" Kazuro exclaimed joyfully. Suddenly the same group entered the corridor, praising their queen, and began to say that he should not interfere with them and, if he saw or heard anything, tell them, and the beauty would sort it out. Kazuro was already fed up with their arrogance, and knowing that there was a monster in the office, an insidious plan matured in his head to teach the upstarts a lesson. If they are so strong, then it will not be difficult for them to defeat the monster. Politely letting them into the office, asking forgiveness to the beauty for their behavior, gives them the opportunity to be the first to fight the monster of this office. Fortunately, there are enough monsters in the hospital. Entering the office, they saw a strange creature sitting on a chandelier fan and were seriously scared. Their mouths were wide open and wanted to scream, but they understood that they would then be noticed and could be killed. This monster possessed the magic of illusions and made them feel their worst nightmares. He used his skill and a red light sparkled on the dark ceiling, which shocked them and made the children stand in stupor. Looking into the big red voice, the trio froze in a trembling stupor, succumbing to hypnosis. Kazuro watched from the side, not knowing the full danger, thinking that they would cope, and just waited. At first, he didn't understand why the guys froze and began to cower in fear. Seeing the trembling beauty Tsuyuki leaving the office, Kazuro turned pale. He was scared, thinking that he had set them up by falling into a very strong monster that none of them could cope with. "Are you okay?" he said, to which the girl told him what the monster was capable of, how he mocked them, forced them to plunge into their darkest nightmares. But it didn't last long, and we managed to get out. Afterwards, they decided that Kajuro had set them up, and that he knew about the monster, but did not warn him. It turns out that he used them to find out the monster's weak point and defeat it. The beauty and the company were terribly angry and said that he had no chance anyway. Kazuro, realizing that the target guys came to the conclusion that the monster is not strong enough to kill them, which means defeating it will not be difficult. You just need to be more cunning. This infuriated the guys even more that he considered them unreasonable. Seeing that the irritated guys were leaving along the corridor in search of other monsters, Kazuro began to figure out how to catch the monster in the ophthalmology office and absorb its power, since it is very entertaining. The ability to freeze with fear will give you a great advantage over your enemies. Seeing a switch on the wall, he came up with the great idea of spinning the monster on the chandelier fan, thereby stunning it. Kajuro presses the button and waits for the show. Seeing the monster spinning on the fan and screaming, Kajuro stood in anticipation of defeating it. Hearing from Tsuyuki that the monster has hypnosis, Kajuro did not look at him and closed his eyes. The monster began to beg the guy to stop it, and he would give him the power. Kazuro is a smart guy and knows that monsters cannot be trusted, but he pretends to believe the monster so that he will buy it. Kajuro turns off the fan, expecting what the monster would do, and he, in turn, wanted to attack the guy. But it turned out that from such spinning, the monster's eye had dried out, and could not use hypnosis. The monster asks the guy to give him eye drops from the cabinet because his voice has dried out a lot because of it. Now, if Kajuro wants to survive, he must do as the monster said. Otherwise, the red eye will attack the guy and tear him into small pieces. For now, Kajuro agrees, thinking another thought in his head on how to defeat such a monster. He does not take his voice off this scarecrow hanging on the chandelier. He begins to walk towards the medicine cabinet and tries to open it. Seeing that in the cabinet, in addition to various medicines and potions, there was also medical alcohol. Kazuro immediately understood what he had to do, and carefully, without giving it away, wiped the sticker off the bottle. Throwing the bottle to the monster, without showing it, he began to wait for a reaction in order to attack in time. He did not want to be hypnotized, and stood with his back to the monster waiting for him to start using the drops. The monster, smiling creepily, was already imagining how he would deal with the guy after he dropped his voice. Opening the bottle, he brought it to his eye and dribbled. Kazuro had never heard such cries of pain before. Smiling sarcastically and watching the monster through the reflection on the glass door of the locker, he realized that this was the right time to attack. Gathering his power, he casts the absorption spell. Glad that everything went so easily, Kajuro was excited about how absorbing the monster would affect him. The monster began to turn into a red stream of mana that rushed into Kazuro's body. Realizing that now he would strengthen his abilities, he was ready to immediately find out what this monster was capable of. Having absorbed the monster, Kazuro saw in the mirror how the monster was imprinted on his body. It was a red voice. Now he could stop the enemy and weaken his abilities. This ability was still very weak, but it could be upgraded. As he left the office, he began to notice that the red voice allowed him to see other monsters nearby, despite the obstacles. The corridor was all stained with blood, and there was a light fog around that rose from the monster's abilities, hiding them. Indeed, the ability of the bloody eye was amazing. It gave Kazuro confidence, because now he could control where the monsters were and were not afraid of an accidental collision. Meanwhile, the beautiful Tsuyuki and her henchmen came across several goblins. The beauty was not taken aback and hit one. Realizing that there were more enemies and she might not be able to cope, they decided to run away. Running along the corridor as fast as they could, they tried to break away and find a place where they could fight off the damned creatures. The bespectacled boy screamed the most and did not want to die. His friend was also very scared and hoped that Tsuyuki would protect them. Kajuro on the landing, walking down. The thought immediately came to mind that he would distract the goblins and the group would be able to escape. The guys, seeing Kajuro, immediately said that now it was his turn to take on the enemy, and reminded him that if he couldn't, then let him use the teleportation scroll. Seeing the crowd of approaching goblins, Kajuro even became happy because he remembered that the examiner said that their beads were very valuable. Finally, the time has come to use the bloody eye for its intended purpose and get rich, Kajuro said. It is noteworthy that the bloody eye acts on monsters a little differently. It simply fetters them so that they cannot move. Kazuro, having previously obtained a chainsaw in one of the offices, began to mercilessly destroy the goblins, because there was a good reward for them. Holding the green goblin stones in his hands, he already imagined what he could spend them on, what fun things to do, and what he had long wanted to try from food. Wandering through the corridors, all the ghosts and monsters fled from Kajuro. His abilities frightened everyone and made them run without looking back. But it was all in vain. Kazuro killed them without a twinge of conscience, hoping to profit from something valuable. Continuing to walk along the corridor in search of a worthy opponent, he stumbles upon a surgery room, from where a strange glow and music can be heard. In it sat a beautiful maiden with ample breasts and long black hair. She was dressed in a kimono, and a white strap was visible on her belt. Kazuro and the devoured monster, seeing the beauty, immediately blushed as bad thoughts entered their heads. She sat in the office and played the zither. The melody was pleasant and bewitching. The skills of this beautiful monster fascinated and frightened at the same time. Who knows what she's capable of? Kazuro wondered what such a beauty was doing in the operating room and how strong she was. He felt danger from her but could not estimate how much. Kajuro began to think about how to defeat her and absorb the power. There were several ideas, but the red voice dissuaded him from going. since he knew that she was dangerous. Kajuro then suggested that she was not just in the operating room. He thought that she had died during the operation and that this place was holding her captive. Plucking up courage, he saw the doctor's coat, and the idea came by itself. Armed with a syringe, he decided to pretend to be a doctor. If she wanted to attack, the red voice would grab her, to which the voice said that she was too strong and this wouldn't work with her. Opening the door, Kazuro looked at the girl playing a musical instrument, afraid to take the wrong step. Hearing the noise, the beauty immediately exclaimed in a menacing voice and was not happy that she was interrupted. She immediately used a musical impulse with her magic to stun the enemy. Kazuro felt the power of the beautiful maiden's zither. The pain in my ears was severe and made it impossible to move. Falling to his knees, Kazuro was confused and thought that he could die in a skirmish with such a monster. He introduced himself as a doctor and hoped that it would help. Her gloomy face showed distrust and anger. The desire to kill was visible on her face. Kazuro began to say that he was a professional surgeon and would be able to help her. Trying not to show his incompetence, he began to clean up the workplace and ask the girl to trust him. Having convinced her to lie down, Kazuro took out a syringe and asked what was bothering Our Lady that she needed to have an operation. Kazuro blushed, looking at the beautiful forms, but the beauty's words surprised him more, because she asked for a breast reduction. Life had not prepared him for this. Making a serious face, Kazuro asked the girl to relax so that he could give her an injection. Her skin was so strong that the syringe did not want to go in. Without showing it, he tried to inject more than once, pretending that he did not hit the vein. Through tears, the girl began to scream that enough was enough and asked him to get ready, otherwise she would kill him. Kazuro said that her skin is too strong and the needles won't take it. They can try something better, if she agrees, without anesthesia. In the process of trying to inject the beauty, at that moment classmates passing by heard voices and decided to see what was happening there. Surprise was visible on their faces. They looked at what was happening in surprise and admired how fearlessly Kajuro spoke to the monster. He grew in their eyes and made them think that he was not as weak as he seemed. Also, all this time, Kajuro was being watched by an examiner who was a ghost. The ability to fly and not show one's presence allows one to evaluate children's actions fairly and impartially. But Kajuro's actions made the examiner wonder how confident he was in the face of danger, how he correctly assessed the situation. After so many attempts to inject the busty girl, she finally gives the go-ahead for the operation without anesthesia, but asks to be more gentle, if not like the girl in front of him. Taking out a chainsaw, Kazuro did not want to spoil such beauty and tried to dissuade her. He started the chainsaw, the sound of which really infuriated the beauty, and began asking questions like how long to cut. Should they be the same or should one be larger than the other? Kazuro knows that in order to devour a monster, he must make him angry. In his head, he tried to come up with more caustic words in order to achieve his goal and absorb her power. Kazuro reminded her that without anesthesia, it would be very painful, so she would have to endure it. After so much bullying and stupid questions, the girl became very angry, starting to scream and threaten Kajuro. Taking her zither in her hands, she wanted to use her strongest spell and kill Kazuro. The monster's aura was very strong, but the level of irritation reached a limit, which was not difficult for the guy to absorb its abilities. Using his power, Kajuro takes great pleasure in casting absorption spells. The busty beauty watches with great surprise, as her strength is useless in front of Kazuro, and the attack played a cruel joke on her. The monster's powers were absorbed. The screams coming from the office could be heard throughout the entire hospital. A monster of this level of power should give amazing skills, the guy thought. The skills were successfully absorbed, and Kajuro now had two monsters with super skills. Now all that remained was to gain enough trust from them to team up in battles. Confidence in his abilities, thirst for more. Now with two monsters of this level, he will be able to defeat anyone by giving them orders. The busty beauty began to shout at him that he would control her so unceremoniously. She was her own mistress and would not tolerate anyone ordering her around. Kazuro assured the girl that he had something else in mind and was not going to boss her around. He wanted to make friends with them in order to defeat his enemies, and he would never push around such a beauty. With virtues like hers, you can stop anyone. The beauty was dissatisfied with the guy's vulgar jokes and confronted him about his depraved thoughts, to which he replied that she had misunderstood again. It just so happens that the skill of the red eye fetters the enemy, but the enemy's mind is clear. This does not give 100% confidence in holding for a long time and puts him at risk. And with the beauty's skills, their brain is exposed to fear. It cannot think sensibly, and in a duet with the bloody eye, immobilizes the enemy confidently and for a long time. Hearing over the hospital speakers that there was less than an hour left by midnight, the voice from the speakers suggested that those who had absorbed the monsters should go to a safe zone to rest and gain strength. Hearing this proposal, Kajuro headed there in the company of his two monsters. The desire to see his classmates who thought he was weak and prove them wrong overwhelmed him.